Did Saul not prophesy with the prophets? Did the people not say, Saul, one of the prophets now? Did Saul not have a harpist at his side, inviting the presence of God into the tent that he abode in? Was Saul not a worshiper? On the surface, it looked like he could prophesy. It looked like he was a worshiper on the surface. And yet, the person who truly prophesied was David, who said, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. He had a prophecy that lasted through the ages about the Messiah. Where was David when he was prophesying like that? Not in the big kingly tent. Not prophesying with all the prophets and getting the accolades of where people were. See, the difference between David and Saul was Saul had God's presence visit him. He had a quote-unquote visitation. Now, I like the word visitation, but just go with me for a second. He visited God's presence every now and again. And the way that God's presence visited him was someone would bring in a harp, and there would be an atmosphere for a moment. And then when that harp left his presence, God's presence left his presence. And so he encountered God. Yes, he did, but for moments. But there was a boy who could prophesy into the future about the Messiah. What better prophecies are there than about Jesus? And when he walked into Saul's tent, it wasn't a visitation. It was the substance that he operated from on a daily basis. And so he didn't have to turn on the miraculous in the moment. He just was a walking, talking miracle wherever he went. Do not let a heart in Israel be troubled. He didn't have to conjure up some words to impress a king. That's the substance he walked in every single moment. When he encountered Goliath, David wasn't trying to read his Bible to catch up to the level that he should be operating in. That's just where he operated all the time. So if it was a surprise attack by a lion or a bear, he was ready because he lived in God's presence. He operated from God's presence, from the substance at all moments. It wasn't a visitation for David. It was a habitation. Everyone say habitation. Let worship not be something that you visit on a Sunday morning. Let it be a habitation. Let it be the place that you live. I'm not saying you have to have a boombox on your shoulder every single moment, because that truly is, singing songs is not worship. It can be part of worship. It's that heart attitude of, God, I walk in your goodness. I walk in your favor. I walk in relationship on the pleasure that you have for me. See, Saul had an idea that sometimes he was favored by God and sometimes he wasn't. David, I don't know what was so naughty about David, but he just thought God loved him all the time. He just walked around in that favor, in that substance. So he didn't have to turn it on. He didn't have to get prepared. He was living in that substance in every single moment. City Church, I want to prophesy to you. In the worship, I saw concrete. And you know that concrete's really hard. If you try and take your fingernails and dig at concrete, there's going to be a loser, and it's not the concrete, it's you. But in the concrete, I saw cracks, and I saw things crumbling off. And I felt God say, attempt things that you've attempted before that didn't work. Attempt them again. Because in my glory, there is something that can break away the shackles. It can break away that rigidness. It can break away religion. So when you re-attempt it, you're not attempting the same thing. It's a completely different substance that you're coming up against. Be bold and courageous. In the places that you have failed before, that's where God performs His greatest miracles. But Lord, I'm just going to smash my head against the wall again. No, it's not a wall. It looks like a wall, but it's crumbling concrete. And it needs someone to bump against it. I love the fact that Jesus didn't need to pray twice for any healing. He just walked around in healing. And yet there's one occasion that whoever was there recorded it. Thank you, Lord, for that person who recorded this miracle, where he did have to pray twice. Sometimes you just need to reattempt that which has already been attempted and failed. You just need to retry. And I felt God saying, some people in this room this morning are walking around like they're failures. And they're not failures. They're just yet to have succeeded in that arena. Have another go. Have another go. It's not concrete. It's still concrete, but it's not concrete anymore. It's now going to crumble in His presence. If that's you, just say, Lord, I receive. Things I've attempted before that I've failed. Lord, I thank you that I'm not a failure because I'm in you and you're a success. Everything you touched was successful. Thank you, Lord, I can have another go. Bob Nichols says, don't quit until it's done. Don't quit until it's done. Have another go. Have another go. Oh, Lord, I try to give that up. Have another go. Oh, Lord, I didn't see your miracles. Have another go. Have another go. Don't be shackled by your past. God set you free from that. Walk into your future in freedom and have another go. Oh, do you feel that life? You know, no preach can do that for you. It's only God who can do that for you. It's only God who can bring you into that freedom. Wow, just say thank you, Holy Spirit. Last night, it's bedtime for Sammy. My mom was calling him, saying, Sammy, go to bed. So he's playing with me, he's wrestling. He just wants to wrestle. And as boys do, and so I'm wrestling, and it comes to, no, Sammy, you got to go now. Mama's going to start getting angry with me. And then you haven't seen wrestling like that. And so then I noticed he turns on, at will, he turns on his cuteness. And he starts to try and speak to me. Now, the whole time, he just wants to fight me. He's stronger than me. He's trying to hit me in the eyes. He's trying to gouge out. But now that he knows I'm saying, no, it's bedtime, he just switches on his cuteness, and now he wants to converse and talk and ask questions and trip me up in my own words and then point out how stupid I am so we can negotiate longer so he doesn't have to go to bed. And I thought, number one, I thought, you naughty little boy. And number two, I thought, oh, just negotiate with me. Just talk to me. Because I don't want you to go to bed. I want to keep on. And I just had the little glimpse of maybe, please forgive me, Father, for I've sinned. No, maybe there's something in God that just loves that lingering. And it sounds so bad. It almost sounds manipulative. Please throw this away if you don't like it. But I can feel the joy in the Father's heart when we get a little naughty. We say, okay, God, but, I know I have to move on, but what about this? And he could just obliterate you in one moment with a little fingernail. He's so powerful. And yet he loves when we linger. He loves spending that bit of time with us. And I know, can I speak as a church leader for a second? Anybody who's led anything, whether it's a team or family or business or whatever, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a huge risk when you linger because people can get bored and people can go, this is boring. I just want to move on. You don't know how to lead. You don't know what you're doing. And so there's a pressure on leaders, and I don't think it's an unhealthy pressure, but most of the time, you're thinking about the next thing so that people can remain occupied and the thing can keep on being built and you can go somewhere. Most of leadership is just making sure the next job is ready to start so that people are on board and just get distracted. Most of it, you have to show up and then make sure there's some sort of plan in place. So there's a risk when you linger because if people aren't engaged with him, then they get distracted and bored. And I've seen that happen in many church services where whoever's leading, like I was facilitating this morning, they linger a little too long and people aren't engaged, and then you waste, basically, except for the holy huddle at the front, the time is wasted. Do you know what have you ever been at a service where everyone's pretending like it's a holy moment and you're actually all like this? Like, let's move on. I'm not even saying that didn't happen today. Do you know what I'm saying? And so there's a risk in that. But when a community honors those moments and engages with God and allows him to enjoy your presence, like Jesus said, and we enjoy his presence, there's something more holy and more beautiful in that than all the preaching that could happen. And so I, as the leader of City Church, would rather the risk for a few people to get bored with the potential that we enjoy his presence and he enjoys our presence, then constantly just by programs shifting around, moving around, keeping people's attention occupied. But actually the point of this gathering, the point of this community, the point of our existence is to enjoy him. So I would rather risk a few people get bored. Not that anyone got bored this morning. Do you know, I'm not trying to defend. I'm just trying to explain to you in your own lives, do not come under a pressure to move on from moments. Because some people tell you that it's urgent. Urgent does not mean important. Urgent does not mean important. Salespeople, I've gone through a lot of sales training because I'm not a good salesperson, so I want to learn. And one of the things they teach you when you go through 101 sales is make the offer short term. So listen, my manager says I can only do this for the rest of the day. If you don't get back me today, I can't give you the 90% off. And so you make it urgent because that sense of urgency means people are more likely to sign up. And on our walks, on our journeys, when you just respond to things because they're urgent, you can be easily distracted from being effective in your walk because everything's urgent. Everyone's going to tell you their issue is urgent. But you may be doing very little that's important because you're responding to that which is urgent. Distinguish what's important, what's urgent. That's why I'm really enjoying Joshua at the moment, Moses and Joshua, because Joshua lingered. Moses went off to go and guide the people on what to do. Not that that's wrong. That was his job. That was God called him to do. But Joshua lingered. And I believe that in that place of lingering is when the substance of who he was fleshed out in his personhood so that he could carry people into the promised land where Moses couldn't. Because Moses was too busy trying to lead the people because it was urgent. But Joshua did the thing that was important, which was linger. Now, let me just be very clear. I understand that what I've just said could be easily dismissed because it sounds like what I'm saying is don't lead. Don't do things. Don't lead. You know, you could easily dismiss that and go, okay, so all we got to do is just hang around the tent and do nothing else. I'm not saying that. But I'm also saying that. And how much activity you have versus how much lingering you have is not something that a human can govern. It's something you walk out with God. But there's very classic stories like a Mary and Martha example where there was an urgency to feed Jesus, and yet Mary chose the better thing because she was the one who chose to be fed in that moment. Is feeding Jesus bad? No, that is a great honor, and there's something glorious on that. How blessed is Martha to have the opportunity to feed Jesus, and yet she criticized someone else for lingering. Sometimes you've got to be the one who cooks for the others to benefit from it. You get no benefit yourself. That's okay. That's not that that's wrong. Just don't criticize someone when they are lingering. Try and rush them on. And it's not really about controlling other people's behavior. It's about you and your own internal dialogue, learning not to be pushed around by urgency. That's the main thing. When you are secure in the substance of lingering, it doesn't matter what other people do. You can linger even in the middle of the storm. Can you see what I'm saying? It will protect you. It'll safeguard you when you know how to linger. And so I just want to thank you, City Church. You guys know you're amazing. But you really are amazing. And I just love the fact that we're able to linger. It's not a formula. You don't have to linger every single moment. You hear what I'm saying? We're just, when there's a moment to linger, we know how to do that. That's beautiful. Thank you. Why could Moses not bring the people of Israel into the promised land? Why could Moses not bring the people of Israel into the promised land? Moses was born for that purpose. Moses' name, do you know what Moses' name means? It means to draw out. Not artistic draw, but like water, to draw it out of a river. Moses' whole purpose in his life was to draw Israel out of bondage. When the Lord heard their cries, he came down to see what was happening. He saw the oppression on his beloved people. And he put a man into the world for that purpose, to draw out Israel, because he was honoring the covenant he had with Abraham. And so when Moses is born, He's born into incredibly difficult circumstances. Much like Jesus, there's huge similarities here. When Jesus was born, Herod tried to kill all the babies under the age of 2 years old because he didn't know who Jesus was. The demonic doesn't know who you are and where things are. It just knows that something's going on, but it's like foggy for them. They don't understand. And so, okay, well, we'll kill all the babies then. And the same thing happened with Moses. There was such an oppression through that Pharaoh, because he partnered with that principality and power. There was such an oppression that they thought, okay, let's just kill all the babies. All the baby boys, we're just going to murder them all. And so Moses is born into the circumstance. He's hidden away. And then the mom puts him in a little straw basket, covers it with tar, little Noah-esque, and puts him into the Nile River. And we all know what happens. The Pharaoh's daughter finds this baby. And what does she do with the baby? She draws him out. And so already you can see the prophetic nature of what God has purposed Moses for, that he is now someone who's going to draw people out. When you see Moses try and rescue Israel out of his own flesh, out of his own attempt, with no partnership with God, just out of his own shoulders, what you see is him running away in absolute fear. And even in him running away from his purpose, he encounters the 7 daughters of Jethro, the priest of Midian. And so he sees these 7 daughters at a well. And at the well, they're being pestered by a whole pile of shepherds. And they're stopping these daughters from drawing out water. So Moses, in his nature of who he is, the substance of his being, goes and delivers these 7 daughters from the oppression of these shepherds, scares them away, and then he draws water out for these 7 daughters and ends up marrying one of the daughters of Jethro. So he's acting in line with his nature. God created him a certain way to draw out, and when we look at Moses' life, when he operates in that substance, you just see drawing out, drawing out, drawing out, drawing out. That's just who he is. So I want to just remind you of the question. Why is it that Moses couldn't bring people into the promised land, but Joshua could? What disqualified Moses from entering the promised land? Everyone remember the moment? He was a conductor? No. He struck the rock. He didn't speak to it. He struck the rock. He didn't speak to it. Let's bring up that encounter. Numbers 20. Is it this? Yeah. God says to Moses, the people are complaining. People are hungry. They're thirsty. The last verse says, we don't even have water. So verse 7 says, and the Lord said to Moses, verse 8, take a staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. Everyone say, pour out its water. So God has just said, Moses, what has he actually just said? Draw out. So he's speaking to the substance of who Moses is. Moses, what do? I draw out. He says, go in the substance that you have, Moses, go and operate out of that substance and go draw water out of the rock. Some people heard that. Some people have yet to hear it. Let's keep on going. Notice it says go and take the staff. When it says go and take the staff, it's not talking about any old staff, a random staff. The staff that the Lord is referring to here, there's a few chapters, we don't know how many years, a few chapters before this, where the people are grumbling, they're angry, they're upset. God, why did you bring us out into this desert? Stiff-necked, bitter people, can keep on complaining. And in that bitterness, they're saying, why is it that Aaron should be the priest and lead us? And Moses gets angry. He wants to kill everybody. I kill everybody. No. And anyone who knows the UFC will know what I'm talking about. And God says to Moses, out of his graciousness, out of his kindness, he says to Moses, Moses, we're not going to just destroy everybody. He says, go and get the 12 tribes together and from each one bring the head of the family, bring the staff from that person. So they get the 12. And he says to them, tomorrow you're going to put these staffs in the presence, in the tent of meeting. And in that presence, there will be a blossoming of the staff that I choose, of the family that I choose to lead Israel as priests. And he says, he prophesies this before it happens, so they can't just make a sign afterwards. That's a sign is often prophesied before it happens, so you can see, oh, that's a signpost to God's miraculous working power. And so he says, the staff that buds with almond buds. Remember in Jeremiah 1, this is the whole foundation of the series we've been talking about. It says, what do you see, Jeremiah? I see an almond tree. He says, you see well. See, I watch over my word to perform it. Jeremiah had this in his mind when he saw almond trees. He knew it was an almond staff that budded in the presence. So God says, of the 12 staffs, the one that buds with an almond blossom, that is the person that I want to lead Israel as a priest. So the next day, we all know what happens. We see one of the staffs had budded with almond buds, blossoms. It turns out it's Aaron's. And so, whilst some of us may apply in triplicate that in that moment God would destroy all those bitter, grumbling people, and Moses would be one of those people, God in his grace responded to the uncertainty about who should lead with his kindness to show, hey, here's a sign. These are the people that I've chosen. These are not people who are oppressing you like the Egyptians. This is not a Pharaoh setup. This is my grace that is governing in the setting. And it's the almond blossom that he's showing. So that's the staff. So they take that staff and they put it in the presence along with the jar of manna. So now we see a few chapters later, people are thirsty, they're bitter, they're grumbling again. And Moses goes to God and says, God, what are we going to do with this thing? He says, go and take my gracious, loving kindness staff that people have already been a witness to my loving kindness. Go and take that staff, Moses, the one who I've called, the substance I've called to draw out. You are going to draw on my goodness in this moment. Isn't this a beautiful picture of God's grace, of his love? Despite people's rebellion. Do you see the setup here? So go take the staff, get the assembly together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out. I want to say you will draw out the water. You will bring water, you will draw water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, not just any old staff, just as he was commanded. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together, everything's beautiful so far, in front of the rock. And Moses said to them, listen, you rebels. Now he's got God's loving kindness figuratively in his hand. And God's saying, speak gently, draw out. I've created you for this moment, Moses, to draw out. And Moses gets his moment to accuse the people that by all rights Moses is correct. They are rebels. They are a stiff-necked people. But God is showing the people his mercy and his grace. And Moses gets up and said, you guys are rebels, with the very sign of his loving kindness in his hand. And it's not like God is speaking to Moses to act out of accordance with who he is. He's speaking exactly to who he created Moses to be. I want you to draw out. Listen, you rebels, must we? God said, speak to the rock and water will flow. Now Moses has taken on the position that he's the dictator. The very accusation of why they needed the blossoming staff is now what he is living in. He's now deciding that he's the one who brings the water out of the rock. And God, in partnership with Moses, saying, Moses, operate out of your substance. We're going to bring water out of this rock. Moses now saying, he's like removing God from the equation. I'm going to bring the water out of the rock. The most humble man on the face of the planet. Doesn't look like he's very humble right now. You rebels. God was showing his kindness. Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice. Gang! Rebels, gang! See, this wasn't because Moses was simply disobedient, and disobedience breaks covenant with God, and therefore you're out. It looks like that if you want to take that surface level reading. This is God purposing something in Moses for him to act out of who he is. And Moses wasn't just rejecting the people, he was rejecting what God called him to, which is to draw out, because he was offended eventually with the people. It wasn't just because I made one mistake in a sequence of choices. I made one wrong choice and now I'm out. That's not it. Moses himself on his journey decided, I'm not going to act in accordance with the substance you called in me. And because I'm going to rebel in that way, whilst calling other people rebels. It's funny. I can get very critical. I can get very, very critical. And in my criticism, often I hear a voice, glass houses. Because when you criticize someone else, what you're saying is, okay, let's play a game of who's better than who. And because you decide to play that game of judgment, you now open yourself to judgment in your own mind. And often, I'm worse off than the person who's just committed the crime that I'm so wonderfully articulating, because I'm conscious of their crime. And I've got a whole log in my own eye. Can you see what I'm saying? I'm not talking about a tightrope of righteousness that now I'm not righteous because I criticize and I'm guilty of the thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about trying not to criticize. What I'm trying to say is when you live in God's loving kindness, you tend not to be critical. But when you don't live in his loving kindness, you can criticize even Jesus. And so he struck the rock twice. Water gushed out because God's intention was to give those people something to drink. And because Moses did have power. So fire does come down when Elijah calls it, which I think it's even more, in my mind, it's even more miraculous than some of the other miracles that happened, because it wasn't what God wanted. God didn't want fire to come down. He wanted rain. And yet Elijah, this is scary, man. This is scary. Elijah could call fire down. So water still comes out of the rock, even though that's not the way God wanted it. Water still comes out. Don't use your miracles that you perform as a sign of, anyway, let's be careful. Hey man, I'd love to be able to call fire down. That'd be great. I just want to be in such intimacy, in such relationship, and operate out of the substance of who he is and who I am. That's what I want to operate in. So he strikes the rock 2 times. It wasn't just striking the rock 2 times. There was rebellion he was operating in. And because he was rebelling against what God said, and he was rebelling against the substance that he was. And so the water still comes out. And if you just stop the story there, you think, okay, that's fine. But look at what God goes on to say. It says, but the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy. Just stop there for a second. We didn't have faith to honor God, that he is holy. Moses didn't want to accuse God of not being holy. Who was he accusing? The people of being rebels. And yet God wasn't treating them as rebels. He was treating them with his mercy and his grace, with his loving kindness. And because Moses looked at their state on the outside and not what God had said about them, God says to Moses, you didn't treat me as holy when I was calling them holy. See, it's very easy to condemn those around us. And let me just be personal. It's very easy for us to condemn ourselves. And yet he's called you holy. And so when we say we're not holy because we've done stupid things, we're not honoring God because he has declared us holy in his sight. And so we don't enter into the promises of God because, not because he disqualifies us, he's calling us holy, but because we disqualify ourselves. God's judgment, it wasn't God's judgment on Moses to not enter into the promises. It was Moses' judgment on the people and therefore himself that disqualified him. Can you? I can't see all of that, so please don't say yes blindly. But can you see some aspect of that? You did not, let's read it again. You did not trust me enough to honor me as holy. You rebels, not God rebel, you rebels. Yeah. Moses, you didn't trust me enough because I called them holy. You might need to meditate on that. I'm going to meditate on it. I only saw that last night. So, to not honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. What he was saying is, I'm still taking them, Moses, even though you don't think that they're holy. Even you think that they're rebellious, I'm still going to take them, but you've been disqualified yourself. I am bringing them into the land. Were these precious, beautiful, holy people? Not on the surface they weren't. They were rebellious, stiff-necked, complaining. We want leeks and garlic. We want to go back to, we don't want to go. But God defended his people and said, no, I've called them holy. What right do you have, Moses, to number one, not call them holy because I call them holy, and number two, to not operate out of the substance I birthed you for? So you deviated from the dream that I put in your heart, and therefore you won't get the results of that dream. Because I called you to be one that draws out. Operate in the substance I called you. So because Moses didn't choose to operate in the substance God put in him, he disqualified himself from entering into the promises. Can you see? This is not God's judgment on Moses. This is Moses' judgment on God. It sounds like Jonah. I'm not going to go to Nineveh. God was wanting to bring mercy. He wanted to redeem those people, and Jonah wouldn't go. So Jonah went down and down and down and down. And he reluctantly, begrudgingly, eventually preached the gospel, but he wasn't happy about it. But God watches over his word to perform it. We can take that down. Mike Tyson, the great philosopher. That's a joke because Mike Tyson was one of the greatest heavyweights for boxing. He quite aptly said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So often we are attempting to walk out in strategy and ideas and patterns, and we think that our good ideas dictate to God how things should play out. You saw this morning, that was not planned. That was not orchestrated. What we stepped into this morning was God's ability to manifest his goodness despite our ability. It wasn't planned. The best that we can do in that moment is step back. Hey, and now we're partners with God. But it wasn't us. It was him, and our ability to flow with him and honor him as holy, even though we don't know what's always going on, is the honorable and holy thing. And we think that our planning and our strategy builds out the dream of God in our lives. In fact, often it's the very opposite. I'm not against planning. Planning has its place. Please understand, we're not rebels. Otherwise, Moses is going to get us. No. It's about the substance that you operate out of. And when you operate out of that substance, you are able to adjust your plan in the moment and in the circumstance. And sometimes you do things that look a little crazy, but because it's operating out of the substance who God created you to be, you can manifest the dream of God despite changing circumstances. The word that God said to me this week was battle tested. I heard him very clearly, battle tested. Battle tested is not having a great design on a piece of paper that then everyone stands around and ogles and goes, oh, those are beautiful lines. Oh, that's a beautiful picture. Oh, this is so nice. Battle tested is you take your plan and you put it into action, and then you see it how it holds up under enemy fire. Is this really got enough substance to overcome the circumstance? So God said to me clearly, do not talk about dreams as if there's these beautiful architectural plans. He said, everything needs to be battle tested. You do not know a prophet by his words. You know a prophet by his fruit. So the architectural plans are wonderful. You need them sometimes. But it's the engineer that makes the thing work. It gets the right substance and the right processes in place so it can carry the weight that it needs to bear up under. You can build with wood, wood, hay, and stubble. But it'll be burned with fire. There'll be something that'll be consumed in the real environment. Some people look at me like I'm crazy. I just want to calm you. I am crazy. You are thinking the right thing.
Come on.
So Moses operated in his substance. When he operated in his substance, he drew things out. When Moses decided to plan and put people in a line and operate outside of his substance, things didn't work out to such a degree that he couldn't even enter the promises that he was meant to draw people out into. So Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Saul had a plan. He lined up his soldiers in battle formation, ready to go after Goliath. And the plan couldn't manifest God's miracle working power. But there was a little boy who came up to the field who had the substance. He was born for that moment and many other moments. And because he operated in that substance, he didn't just turn it on in the moment. That's who he was. He was able to deal with the situation in a way that Saul could never have imagined. Battle tested. Battle tested. Your dream cannot remain as an ideal concept. It's got to be something that's substantiated. And the way that it's substantiated, the way that it's made manifest, is through the substance of who you are. This is not a pressure that you have to live up to the dream. This is a reality of how God made you. Didn't Bonnie preach so well last week? Didn't she just bless us? You know, I've had a few people say to me, Sean, nice series. I had more messages about Bonnie's message last week than all of the other messages. So I'm not insecure. But she said, we are God's dream. We are the substance of that dream. And so when you have a dream, you can't just have this ideal architectural plan. It's got to be engineered into reality. And the way that you engineer it is not through planning, it's through the substance of who you are. And when you operate in that substance, Winnie, you said the word, I don't like this word, but you said effortless. It's effortless. It's just who you are. It just flows. The reason I don't like this word, because I think, well, I'm still breathing. That's not effortless. But I know what you mean. I've had to work through that, my pain and insecurity of that word. It means you're not pretending to be somewhere else in order for it to happen. You're just operating from who you are. You don't have to plan to be Winnie tomorrow. You just are Winnie. You wake up and you're Winnie. And so when Winnie operates as Winnie, it's authentic and there's a manifestation of God's goodness. When Winnie's trying to be Patrick, there's going to be all sorts of problems. Because let me tell you, if you compare Winnie trying to be Patrick and Patrick will win in his sleep because he's Patrick. He didn't have to try to be Patrick, he just is Patrick. Can you... Okay. Sean is Sean, yes. There's a high level theology now. Everybody, you are yourself. Let me give you a practical example. When I started preaching here many years ago, Rob was the big preacher. He goes around the world to preach on stages. When I tried to preach, I fumbled along. I was tricky. I'm much better now. I'm still not there. But one of the difficulties is preaching in a beautiful church like City Church. But with Rob, who I love as a preacher, I think he's just one of the best preachers. That's just my opinion. That's what I love. And so when Rob would preach, wonderful. And then Sean would come and try and preach. And guess who Sean tried to be like? Rob. So Sean knew this. So then Sean tried not to be like Rob. It's even worse. So now little old Sean, I'm not Rob, but I can't be like him, but I'm trying to be like him. How do I say? And I had to throw off those shackles and those loopholes, those loops where I would just keep on getting stuck and just decide I'm going to be who I am. And for the most part, I attempt, for the most part, I am. I at least, I am who I am. But not to say that there's no influence from Rob. Not to say that there isn't something that rubs off. But when you just decide, okay, I'm going to operate in the substance that I am, there's a flow of his anointing. There's a flow of his grace. Because you know what? No one else can preach like I can preach. If I'm acting out of my substance. Just like no one can preach like Rob can preach and you can preach. Can you? When I try and act like someone else, I'm not acting out of that substance, and I cannot enter into the promises. Not because God's disqualifying me, but because He's gifted me a substance. He's honored me with that substance to operate out of that. Okay. Let me bring up one more detail, one more story. Why is it that Moses couldn't bring the people in, but Joshua could? Because Moses stopped operating out of the substance that God gave him. And so he disqualified himself from entering. Now, when you see Joshua who lingers, Joshua comes into the promised land. He gets everyone circumcised, big painful experience, and they're about to go into battle. They're about to cross the river to enter into Jericho. And I believe it was the night before he's about to go in. Can you imagine the pressure that's on Joshua? Joshua is the new leader of Israel. He has now been given the mantle and the responsibility to lead these people in, something that Moses couldn't do. His predecessor couldn't bring the people in. And so this, in many ways, is unprecedented territory for Joshua. He had seen this from a distance. He had spied the land 40 years before, but now he's here. This is the thing he's dreamed of, and now he's leading people. He's going to get runs on the board. If he doesn't get runs on the board, he knows how these people can turn against him. So there's pressure on him. And so the night before, he goes to the river, and as he crosses over the river, there's a man standing there with this sword drawn. Now this new leader, Joshua, is in new territory, and he's encountering these new enemies. They haven't encountered these enemies before. And as he walks up to this guy with this sword drawn, he must be thinking, is this guy an Israelite? Or is he an enemy from Jericho? And so he goes up to him and says, are you for us or are you against us? Everything of Joshua's frame in that moment has been pressured into, I've got to win this fight, or I'm going to lose this fight. You're either for me or you're against me. I know the pressure that Moses was under. I'm under arguably worse pressure. I got to win this. And so he's got this binary thinking. He's locked in. You're for me or you're against me. Do I have to kill you now? Am I going to have to fight you? Or are you on my side? And the response is amazing. He says, neither. For I am the Lord, I am the commander of the armies of the Lord. Joshua falls down on his face. And then it says, and the Lord spoke to him. Is that an angel? Is that the Lord himself? I don't know. I love thinking about those things. And then the Lord says to him, take your sandals off. Just like Moses had that experience. If he didn't have that encounter, Joshua would have run into battle with all the unction and all the gusto and all the strategy of a little boy and would have smashed his armies against the walls and they would have been obliterated. But he was under such a pressure to perform in that moment because he had to outdo his predecessor. He had to do something new in order to enter into the promises. He was under such a pressure, it would have been the end of all of Israel. So in that moment, God shows up and says, Joshua, take your sandals off. Take your rights off. Bow down. Get humble. I need you to act in line. This is going to be so powerful. This is going to bless you. It's going to confuse you, but it's going to bless you. I need you to act in line with the substance that you are. See, we think of Joshua as a warrior. Joshua was not a warrior. He was a warrior, but he wasn't a warrior. Joshua was a servant. He was Moses' servant for many years. That was the substance of who he was. Now, please forget about the theological thing about sons and servants. We all know that. Just understand that his nature of who he was to serve Moses in the mission. He did win great battles, but if you just woke Joshua up at 3 a.m., who was Joshua? Yes, Moses, what can I get you? What can I do here? Okay, Moses, you've got to go and lead. I'm just going to linger in the presence. That was his heart, was that of a servant. And so the substance that he was meant to operate in was that of a servant. And now he's put on his warrior breastplate and he's going to go and take a battle. He would have been obliterated because that's not his substance. So the Lord stops him and graciously says, listen, Joshua, don't think about these things of winning and losses. You got to think about this out of the substance that you are. I'm going to lead you in battle. You become the servant that your substance is. And you need to follow the ark. Remember how many years you lingered in that presence, Joshua. I want you to linger in the presence as the ark goes around that wall. I don't want you to shout. I don't want you. That was Moses' gig. Moses was the big leader at the front. Joshua, I want you to linger in the presence. And as the presence goes around that wall, I want you to linger. Keep on doing what your substance is. Can you see that? Hold on, Lord. We've been marching around the desert for 40 years. You want us to keep on marching around? Yes. See, some people think to get a new result, you need to do a new thing. That's what Einstein thought. But Einstein's not God. To do the same thing, expecting a different result is insanity. You all know that quote. And yet God is calling Joshua to do the same thing that they did for 40 years. Why? Because he's speaking to the substance of who Joshua is. I want you to serve me, Joshua. Take your shoes off. I'm going to command these armies. You're going to serve me in the purposes that I have for Israel. And so Joshua, out of that substance, can you imagine the security and the comfort that brings Joshua? He's under this performance pressure. He is the leader. He is a warrior. I'm not taking that away from him. But now he's in a place where he's submitting the way his substance was created to. And so he comes into that place of following God. And in that place, a great battle is won for Israel. And he looks like a fantastic leader and a fantastic warrior. But it was from the place of his substance. What was your pattern, Joshua? We did the same thing we always do. Well, Einstein wouldn't be happy with you. Yeah, but that's fine. Einstein's not my God. God is my God. And God can use the same thing to produce a different result. You don't have to be. See, at the beginning of the series, I said there's a creativity. So some people come under pressure to be more creative. Sometimes you don't have to do something different to get a different result. Sometimes the environment shifts. Sometimes something clicks in you out of the substance who you are that can get a different result. So you can, man, I know when I'm being fake. I know it. We had some people this week. Sufisa was laughing at me because someone walked in and I knew something was off with them. And we went in a church setting. It was a business setting. And they started to talk with me and I became overly, and he actually walked out of the room because he was like, now Bonnie knows exactly what I'm talking about. Because I knew they were dangerous. I knew there was something going on. And so I was overly polite and overly accepting so as to create no problems. And they knew I was being fake. And so Safisa just walked out and said, I don't know what you're doing. Because it was inauthentic. It's not who I am. And I would be able to produce nothing in that situation because it's not through the substance of who I am. Now, please don't all criticize me for being fake. I was just trying to escape that situation. The way that you live the dream of God, the way that you build the dream of God is not over there. It's over here. It's who God created you to be, out of the substance that you already are. You don't need to add something else to your diet in order to get thin. You need to stop adding things to your diet. See, people want to get well, so they take 8 other medicines to try and get well. You don't, let me be very careful. I'm not a doctor. Don't take my advice. I'm an idiot. But most often, in order to get well, you need to remove things from your diet and your medication list in order to get well. Don't do that. Take all your medicines. Take double. Because there's an interest in the pharmacy world to give you more because they make more money. They're not trying to get you off medication. They put you on medication. Anyway, I can feel Big Pharma hating the spirit of Big Pharma. If you're going to take medication, take medication. Medication can save lives. But just understand there's a propensity there to over-subscribe or prescribe to make more money. Understand. Operate out of the substance that God created you to be. If Moses just stayed in the realm that Moses was born for, Moses would have inherited the whole land. He would have been there with Joshua. If Joshua decided, no, I'm the big boy and I'm the big warrior and I'm going to take this, he would have tried to chop the Lord up. That's what he was trying to, he was saying, are you for me or against me? I can imagine he had his hand on his weapon. I'm not on your side, I'm not on their side. I'm the commander of the army of the Lord. Whose side are you on, Joshua? Sorry, Lord. Operate out of the substance that God created you to be. When you operate out of that place, there's an effortlessness. And you will be able to walk into the promises God called you to. Lift your hands. If you don't like what I'm about to say, just say it anyway. Okay? You can repent of this later. Say this. Say, Lord, thank you for making me me. Thank you for my big nose. Thank you for my tricky personality. Lord, thank you that sometimes other people don't like me. But thank you for me. Lord, in any area that I'm not operating out of the substance that you called me to be, Lord, let me navigate with all grace and all mercy and all kindness into a greater degree of just that substance. Lord, let me not be trapped by trying to live up to other people's expectations or even my own expectations to be a nicer than Jesus Christian. Lord, let me operate out of the substance you called me to be. Lord, if you call me to be like a Moses that can draw out, let me draw out the best that I can. And let me not be concerned about trying to put other people in a line. Let me just draw out. Lord, if you created me to be like Joshua who lingered in your presence, let me linger like no one else can linger. Lord, if you call me to be like David to chop giant heads off, then let me chop all the giant heads off. Let me just operate in that. Let me not be a politician or let me not be a stay-at-home whatever. Let me do what you call me to do, Lord. Lord, let me be comfortable in my own skin. And anything that's not in alignment with you, Lord, help me navigate out of that. Let me not judge myself or criticize myself or beat myself up. Lord, help me to deliver myself of myself. Help me to be comfortable in my own skin. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I remember, Bonnie, I'm not going to try and steal your testimony, but I am. I remember in Kazakhstan, Bonnie was in incredible pain. She had a health thing. And in one of the sessions there was such glory and such God's good. You know when God's goodness just descends? A little like this morning. And you said you hated yourself. You hated yourself. And the thing that helped Bonnie to connect with God's goodness and receive a major miracle in that moment was not looking at God's goodness. It was looking at God loving her, that God had accepted her. And when she came into contact with that, it was like just power just flowed. And she didn't even know she was being healed. Later on, she was like, oh, I've been healed. She wasn't trying to get healing. She was just looking at herself the way that God viewed her, because she was beating herself up and hating herself. That's not to say that everything about Bonnie is perfect, but it's to say that God has called her holy. Who is she to dishonor God and treat him as unholy in her midst? Just say, Lord, thank you for me. Thank you that you made me the way that you made me. Bless your name, Lord. Bless your name. Bless your name. Father, I pray for my brothers and sisters in this room and on camera. I just pray for such an awareness of your goodness in their lives. Such an awareness of your kindness. Lord, thank you that you loved us so much that you gave your Son for us. Thank you. Thank you. I pray that we'd be ever conscious of the holiness that you operate in, that you would call us holy. Thank you. Thank you. And this is going to sound strange, but in closing, I heard a comedian say a couple of weeks ago, when parents shout at their kids, kids don't love their parents less. They love themselves less. And I believe that some of us, including myself, we have heard the Father shout at us sometimes. And it wasn't him. It was a lie. And we didn't love him less. We loved ourselves less. So I feel like there's an upgrade in understanding. That's probably my son. There's concrete cracking in the way that we view God viewing us. Just say thank you, Father. We love you, City Church. Have a phenomenal week. God loves you.